Josh Gates has chased legends across the globe on Expedition X, haunted prisons, ancient curses, remote jungles hiding forgotten secrets. But industry speculation suggests one investigation didn't end with a revelation. It ended with lawyers. According to unconfirmed reports circulating within production circles, what Josh may have uncovered wasn't paranormal at all. Some believe it touched on something far more serious, potentially criminal. There are claims that Discovery ultimately chose to shelve a fully completed episode, filmed, edited, ready. And then it vanished. No trailer, no explanation, no acknowledgement. Tonight we're examining what industry insiders have speculated about for years, how a paranormal investigation may have intersected with concerns involving antiquities trafficking and broader legal issues, and why, according to those familiar with the situation, airing it may have posed risks the network wasn't willing to take. Because sometimes the most unsettling discoveries aren't supernatural. They're human. Like many investigations, this one reportedly began with a viewer tip, an email forwarded through intermediaries. The source claimed to represent a wealthy private collector in Thailand who owned a bronze ceremonial mask said to carry 5 years of relentless misfortune. According to the collector, anyone who touched the mask experienced vivid nightmares, unexplained illnesses, accidents. Industry speculation suggests the story initially appeared to be ideal paranormal television, a dramatic artifact, an exotic location, and a subject eager to participate. But according to unconfirmed reports, questions soon emerged about the mask's documented history. Some believe members of the production team began noticing irregularities in its provenance, the paper trail that establishes where an artifact came from and how it was legally acquired. There are claims that experts consulted behind the scenes raised concerns that the object may have shown characteristics consistent with looted antiquities. If true, that would shift the investigation dramatically, from curse to cultural property issue. According to individuals familiar with media legal protocols, that's the moment when things can escalate quickly. Some believe legal teams became involved almost immediately. Others suggest the situation may have intersected with sensitive international agreements governing stolen cultural heritage. There are even unverified reports that federal agencies later requested access to the footage. However, none of these claims have been officially confirmed by Discovery or Josh Gates. What is confirmed is this: an episode reportedly filmed in Thailand never aired. And in the absence of an explanation, speculation filled the void. Some believe the decision was purely precautionary. Others argue the investigation may have touched on issues far beyond paranormal entertainment. Without official confirmation, the full truth remains unclear. But industry speculation suggests that when entertainment intersects with international law, networks tend to choose caution over controversy, accidents. His marriage reportedly collapsed. Business ventures failed spectacularly. According to the collector, several extended family members died in what he described as freak incidents after the mask entered his collection. He believed the object was cursed, and he wanted Josh to uncover its origins and the supposed paranormal force attached to it. From a production standpoint, industry speculation suggests it checked every box. Historical mystery, supernatural claims, access to an elite private collection, an exotic filming location, and a wealthy subject offering full cooperation. According to unconfirmed reports, the collector even offered to cover certain production expenses and provide private security, an unusually generous arrangement that some believe made the episode especially attractive from a network perspective. On paper, it appeared to be a perfect setup, a cursed artifact, a dramatic personal story, high production value, international intrigue. What could possibly go wrong? At that stage, no one, at least publicly, suspected they might be stepping into something more complicated than a haunting. Josh Gates and Phil Torres reportedly traveled to Bangkok expecting a classic Expedition X case, an artifact said to bridge ancient history with modern paranormal experiences. The bronze mask was described as originating from the Khmer Empire, possibly dating to the 12th or 13th century. If authentic, it wouldn't just be cursed, it would be historically significant. However, industry speculation suggests that questions soon began to surface about the mask's documented origins. According to unconfirmed reports from individuals familiar with the production, subtle inconsistencies may have prompted closer scrutiny. Some believe that what initially appeared to be a supernatural mystery may have evolved into something far more serious, though no official statement has ever confirmed those details. It was culturally invaluable. The collector presented paperwork claiming he had legally purchased the mask from a respected Southeast Asian antiquities auction house. On the surface, everything looked clean. No red flags, no warning signs. Day one of filming went exactly as planned. The collector was polished, educated, persuasive. He described the tragedies that followed the mask's arrival: nightmares, illness, financial collapse, family deaths. Phil set up environmental monitoring equipment to detect electromagnetic fluctuations. Josh photographed the mask, measured it, documented its detailing. At first glance, the craftsmanship was stunning. The bronze work aligned with classical Khmer artistic motifs. But something felt off. The patina, the natural oxidation that develops over centuries, wasn't consistent. Some areas appeared genuinely ancient, others looked artificially treated. The wear patterns didn't match what Josh would expect from a properly excavated and documented temple artifact. And that distinction mattered. Josh Gates isn't just a television personality. He holds an archaeology degree from Boston University and has years of legitimate excavation experience. On day two, that expertise took over. He began asking specific questions about provenance. Where exactly was it discovered? Which excavation site? Which supervising archaeologist? What was the documented chain of custody? The collector's answers became vague. The auction paperwork lacked context. No detailed discovery records, no excavation permits, no cultural ministry export authorization. And then Josh asked to examine the mask under alternate lighting. That's when he saw it clearly. The patina wasn't just uneven, it had been partially stripped, aggressively cleaned. A common tactic used by looters who remove soil and corrosion to make artifacts more marketable, while destroying irreplaceable archaeological data in the process. Then he saw something worse: tool marks on the back of the mask. Not careful extraction marks from a controlled dig. Pry marks, the kind left when something is ripped from a temple wall. Josh had seen this before during legitimate excavations. He knew what illegal removal damage looked like, and this matched. During a filming break, he pulled the producer aside. This wasn't a cursed relic. It was almost certainly looted. And if that was true, they weren't documenting paranormal activity. They were standing inside a potential international antiquities trafficking operation. What Josh was looking at wasn't a cursed relic. It was almost certainly a looted antiquity, illegally removed from a protected archaeological site, likely in Cambodia, where Khmer temples have faced decades of systematic plundering by organized criminal networks. The paperwork the collector provided: sophisticated, convincing, almost certainly forged, designed to launder a stolen cultural artifact into the legitimate art market. And if Expedition X continued filming and aired the episode, they wouldn't just be telling a ghost story. They could be normalizing antiquities trafficking, possibly violating international cultural property laws the United States had agreed to uphold under the 1970 UNESCO Convention. At first, the producer pushed back. "We're here to investigate paranormal claims, not audit acquisition paperwork," but Josh wouldn't move forward without verification. He contacted museum colleagues who specialized in Southeast Asian antiquities. He sent high-resolution photos of the mask, close-ups of the tool marks, the patina inconsistencies, the documentation. The responses came back within hours, and they were definitive. The mask matched descriptions of artifacts looted from Angkor-era temple sites during periods of political instability. The damage patterns were consistent with forced removal from temple walls. This wasn't speculative. It was textbook trafficking. When Josh escalated the findings to Discovery executives, the reaction wasn't curiosity, it was panic. Legal teams were assembled overnight, multiple departments began assessing exposure, and then came the bombshell. By filming the mask, by interviewing the collector about how he acquired it, the production may have created evidentiary material connected to an active international crime category. Broadcasting the episode could implicate the network in promoting or facilitating cultural property violations. The legal analysis cited the 1970 UNESCO Convention, bilateral repatriation agreements, and U.S. federal statutes tied to trafficking in stolen antiquities. Then the situation worsened. Attorneys discovered that Cambodia had specifically registered this type of Khmer ceremonial mask on its national patrimony list, meaning its removal from the country was explicitly illegal, no exceptions. The United States maintains bilateral agreements with Cambodia for repatriation of looted cultural property. That meant possession, transport, or commercial promotion involving such artifacts could trigger U.S. legal scrutiny, even if the filming occurred abroad. Discovery was suddenly staring at a nightmare scenario, a television episode that unintentionally documented a potentially prosecutable international crime. The network's insurance carrier was contacted immediately. Their response was blunt: any liability arising from documentation of criminal conduct, even unknowingly, was excluded from coverage. If multiple governments pursued action, Discovery would be financially exposed. Fines, legal fees, civil suits, potentially millions. Production was halted immediately. Josh and Phil were instructed to stop filming. No further interviews, no additional footage. Avoid any interaction with the collector that could complicate matters further. The crew was confined to their hotel, phones buzzing, lawyers in 3 countries coordinating crisis strategy. What began as a haunted artifact investigation had turned into an international legal emergency. And the most disturbing part, the mask might not have been cursed, but it was stolen. The footage already shot wasn't logged for post-production. It was secured, preserved, potential evidence, not broadcast content. For Josh, that was the hardest part. His archaeological training had done exactly what it was supposed to do, identify cultural theft. But exposing that truth meant killing an episode he'd invested weeks into creating. The cursed mask would have been compelling television. Instead, it became something else entirely. Evidence in a possible international criminal investigation. And that shift changed everything. Once Discovery's legal team escalated the issue, security consultants began urgent background checks on the collector. What came back was deeply unsettling. He wasn't just a wealthy enthusiast with questionable taste. He was allegedly a major figure in international black market antiquities networks. Intelligence files linked him to trafficking routes moving looted artifacts from Cambodia, Thailand, Myanmar, and Laos into private collections worldwide. Legitimate businesses, charitable foundations, art galleries. According to investigators, they functioned as financial cover, laundering profits from antiquities sales reportedly worth hundreds of millions. But it didn't stop there. Security reports connected him to individuals known for violent enforcement within trafficking circles. Associates had been implicated in threats, assaults, and at least 2 unsolved murders tied to disputes over smuggling routes and cooperation with law enforcement. Discovery's security advisors were blunt. If the network aired an episode exposing this man's activities, even indirectly, retaliation was a real risk. These weren't fringe smugglers. Organized antiquities trafficking is one of the world's most profitable illicit trades. And historically, criminal networks protecting those routes have used intimidation and violence to preserve them. The collector had welcomed Expedition X because he believed the episode would legitimize his collection. International exposure, credibility, reputation enhancement, a respected television host treating him as a serious antiquities connoisseur, not a trafficker. If he learned that Josh had identified the mask as looted, if he suspected Discovery might report him, the consequences could escalate fast. The network now faced a no-win scenario. Air the episode and risk legal exposure, international treaty violations, and potential retaliation. Cancel it and bury weeks of work while navigating the fallout quietly. What began as a paranormal investigation had evolved into something far more dangerous. A collision between entertainment, international law, and organized crime. And in that moment, the mystery wasn't about curses, it was about survival. Discovery's executive meeting lasted less than 2 hours. The legal briefing took most of it. On one side of the table, weeks of filmed content, international travel costs, crew salaries, post-production already scheduled. On the other, potential treaty violations, uninsured legal exposure, possible criminal scrutiny, and credible security threats. The network's general counsel framed it plainly. If this airs, we are not just telling a story. We are amplifying a suspected trafficking operation. Even if they blurred names, even if they edited carefully, even if they reframed the narrative around cultural theft. The raw footage already documented possession of a potentially looted Cambodian patrimony object. Broadcasting it could be interpreted as commercial promotion, and promotion could trigger liability. Insurance had already confirmed they would not cover any legal fallout tied to criminal conduct, even if unknowingly documented. That meant Discovery would absorb every lawsuit, every investigation, every fine. Then security advisors spoke. There was a credible risk of retaliation, not hypothetical, not exaggerated. Organized antiquities trafficking networks have historically responded aggressively when threatened. The calculus changed instantly. This was no longer a programming decision, it was a risk containment decision. The final vote was unanimous. The episode would never air, not edited, not reframed, not as a cautionary special, permanently shelved. All footage secured under legal hold, access restricted, no promotional materials released, no public explanation. Internally, it was classified as illegal suppression. Externally, it simply vanished. Josh was informed that evening. He understood the logic. He didn't argue the law, but it stung. He had uncovered something real, something meaningful, a crime against cultural heritage. But the truth couldn't be broadcast without potentially endangering lives and triggering international consequences. Discovery quietly withdrew from the project. Communication with the collector ceased. Through intermediaries, legal counsel ensured that no further interaction would occur. The episode never entered the edit bay. No trailer, no teaser, no acknowledgement. To viewers, it was just another missing investigation. To those involved, it was a reminder that sometimes the most dangerous discoveries aren't paranormal at all. They're criminals. And sometimes the responsible decision is not to air the story. Discovery now faced a brutal paradox. Broadcasting the episode risked massive legal consequences. Canceling it risked provoking violent criminals who had invested time, money, and reputation facilitating the production. And then the situation became far more serious. During the initial gallery tour, Josh had filmed more than just the mask. Dozens of artifacts were captured on camera, high resolution, cataloged, clear enough for later analysis. When experts reviewed that footage, several pieces triggered immediate alarm. Some matched descriptions of artifacts looted from conflict zones. Iraq, Syria, sites known to have been systematically plundered between 2014 and 2017. At least 3 objects resembled items stolen during ISIS's occupation of ancient cities. One alabaster relief fragment appeared nearly identical to pieces taken from Nimrud before the Assyrian site was destroyed in 2015. Another cuneiform tablet resembled objects reported missing from the Mosul Museum during ISIS control. This was no longer about cultural property violations. If authentic, these objects represented potential material support for a designated terrorist organization, a federal crime under U.S. law carrying severe penalties. And on camera, the collector had openly discussed purchasing artifacts through private channels. He may not have known their full origin, but legally that distinction often doesn't matter. Discovery's legal team realized something chilling. The footage might constitute evidence relevant to terrorism financing investigations. Broadcasting it could interfere with active intelligence operations. It could expose investigative methods. It could compromise ongoing efforts to dismantle trafficking networks tied to extremist funding. Within days, multiple federal agencies contacted Discovery. Requests quickly became directives: secure the footage, preserve chain of custody, limit internal access, classify information tied to national security concerns. What began as a paranormal investigation had inadvertently intersected with counterterrorism enforcement spanning multiple continents, and the network was caught in the middle. Within 72 hours of halting production, Discovery was coordinating with officials from 5 different countries. Each demanded something different. Cambodia's Ministry of Culture insisted all footage related to Khmer artifacts be turned over immediately as evidence in ongoing repatriation and trafficking prosecutions. They warned of diplomatic consequences, including restricting future filming access if Discovery failed to cooperate. Thai authorities wanted access to pursue domestic criminal charges against the collector, who had long operated in legal gray zones shielded by influence and corruption. U.S. agencies, including the FBI and Homeland Security investigations, invoked National Security Authority to obtain copies of any footage tied to artifacts potentially connected to terrorism financing. At that point, Discovery no longer controlled the narrative. They were custodians of evidence. The episode wasn't just banned. It was effectively absorbed into overlapping international investigations. The cursed mask had vanished, but what it revealed was far more disturbing than any supernatural claim. It exposed how ancient history, organized crime, and modern terrorism intersect in a global black market worth billions. And for Josh, the irony was stark. He went looking for a curse. What he found was something very real and very dangerous. The crisis didn't stop at network lawyers. It escalated to the diplomatic level. The U.S. State Department intervened directly, warning Discovery that airing the episode could disrupt sensitive negotiations involving cultural property repatriation agreements with multiple Southeast Asian nations. Behind the scenes, those talks were fragile. Publicly exposing trafficking networks, especially before coordinated legal action, could derail years of diplomatic progress. Then came Interpol. An international task force had reportedly been monitoring the same trafficking network for years. Undercover operations were in motion, financial trails were being traced, cases were being built quietly across jurisdictions. And then a television crew arrived in Bangkok asking detailed questions about artifact origins. From a law enforcement perspective, that was catastrophic. If the collector or his associate suspected scrutiny, they could destroy records, move assets, intimidate witnesses, disappear. Discovery was warned that if their presence had materially compromised active investigations, they could face obstruction-related scrutiny. The network immediately retained former federal prosecutors and international law specialists. The goal shifted from programming strategy to damage containment. Meanwhile, Josh was facing something more personal, an ethical fracture. As a trained archaeologist, he had a professional obligation to report looted antiquities. The Society for American Archaeology's Code of Ethics requires members to oppose and report trafficking in cultural property. Remaining silent about a looted Khmer mask and possibly ISIS-linked artifacts would violate that code. It could damage his standing in the archaeological community permanently. But as a television host and executive producer, he had contractual obligations to Discovery. Crew members depended on the show. Canceling a completed episode meant hundreds of thousands of dollars in losses. It strained relationships with executives who expected consistent delivery. There was a real possibility the show could be canceled entirely. Dozens of livelihoods were connected to that decision. And then there was safety. Security consultants warned Josh that individuals within the trafficking network might see him as a threat. If prosecutions moved forward, he could be called as a witness. His travel patterns were reviewed, risk assessments conducted, his family received security briefings. What should have been a standard international shoot had become something that carried personal risk. The emotional toll was profound. Josh had entered archaeology to protect cultural heritage, to illuminate history. Instead, doing the right thing meant destroying his own work, possibly endangering his team, possibly ending his show. He questioned whether television and archaeology could truly coexist without compromise. Discovery's response was systematic. Erased the episode. Production schedules were quietly revised. Season episode counts were adjusted to conceal the gap. Press materials referencing the Thailand investigation were pulled before archival indexing. Internal file names were changed. Access to raw footage was restricted under legal hold. Crew members were required to sign expanded non-disclosure agreements with severe financial penalties for discussing any aspect of the incident. Publicly, nothing had happened. Privately, an entire episode had vanished into legal containment. No trailer, no explanation, no acknowledgement. To viewers, it looked like normal programming shifts. To those inside the network, it was a reminder that sometimes the most dangerous mysteries aren't supernatural, they're geopolitical. And sometimes the responsible choice isn't telling the story, it's burying it. The non-disclosure agreements went far beyond standard television confidentiality clauses. They didn't just cover what had been filmed, they covered the entire legal and security crisis that followed. Any breach could trigger lawsuits seeking millions in damages. For the crew, that wasn't theoretical. It was career-ending risk. The message was clear. Silence wasn't optional. It was enforceable. The footage itself was treated with extraordinary caution. Encrypted storage, air-gapped hard drives, physical copies secured in restricted facilities, access granted only to designated attorneys and senior executives. Discovery created formal chain of custody documentation, logging every individual who viewed the footage, the date, the duration, and the purpose. This wasn't content management anymore. It was evidence control. Because by that stage, the material was potentially relevant to ongoing criminal investigations across multiple jurisdictions. Yet even under lockdown, traces slipped through. Production scheduling databases still reflected the Thailand shoot before edits were made. Crew members had posted travel photos from Bangkok before being instructed to delete them. Flight manifests were public. Hotel booking confirmations were archived by online tracking services. Internet communities noticed. Reddit threads began compiling screenshots. Paranormal forums mapped timelines. Users compared episode counts to production cycles and identified a missing slot. Something had been filmed, and something had vanished. Speculation filled the vacuum. Some theories were wildly exaggerated, others were surprisingly close to the truth. Then, 6 months later, the story resurfaced in a very different context. Thai authorities announced the arrest of the collector. The operation was coordinated internationally. Interpol, the FBI, Southeast Asian law enforcement agencies. Charges included antiquities trafficking, money laundering, and fraud spanning nearly 2 decades. Recovered items included artifacts traced to looted temple sites in conflict zones. The investigation had clearly been much larger than anyone on the Expedition X crew initially understood. For Josh, the arrest was confirmation. The mask hadn't been cursed, it had been stolen, and the episode that never aired had quietly intersected with a global crackdown on cultural and financial crime. No public acknowledgement ever tied the show to the arrest. Discovery never referenced the incident. But internally, the lesson was permanent. Not every mystery belongs on television. Some belong in court. The fallout didn't end with the arrest. Authorities seized the collector's entire inventory, more than 400 artifacts, estimated value $200 million. Items were cataloged, traced, and repatriated to their countries of origin. The Khmer ceremonial mask that triggered everything was returned to Cambodia's National Museum. It is now displayed publicly, not as a cursed relic, but as a recovered piece of stolen cultural heritage, accompanied by documentation outlining its removal and recovery from international trafficking networks. For Expedition X, the incident became a structural turning point. Vetting procedures were overhauled. Today, no artifact is filmed without provenance verification. Independent consultants conduct background investigations on private collectors before production agreements are signed. Legal teams pre-screen objects tied to archaeological sites. Export permits are reviewed. Chain of custody documentation is verified. Josh personally reviews paperwork for any item connected to protected cultural property. The show's risk assessment process now resembles due diligence protocols used by museums, not entertainment studios. The precedent spread beyond one program. Other paranormal and investigation series, including Ghost Adventures, Paranormal Lockdown, and Destination Fear, reportedly strengthened their own vetting standards after the incident circulated privately within industry circles. Insurance providers followed. Production companies are now often required to carry coverage addressing potential cultural property violations. It adds cost, it adds paperwork, but it prevents catastrophic exposure. Publicly, Josh rarely discusses the episode. When asked in interviews, he typically deflects. Some investigations don't pan out. Sometimes it's better not to pursue certain paths, but observers note the shift in tone, the guarded phrasing, the hesitation. For someone who built his career on curiosity, this chapter left a mark. It forced him to reconcile two identities: archaeologist, bound by ethical responsibility to protect cultural heritage, television personality tasked with delivering compelling content to millions. In this case, doing the right thing meant destroying the story, and choosing silence over spectacle. The episode never aired, no trailer, no official acknowledgement, but its impact reshaped how paranormal and investigative television handles the intersection of history, crime, and entertainment. The mask wasn't cursed. It was evidence. And sometimes the most disturbing discoveries aren't supernatural at all. They're human. The mask wasn't cursed. It was stolen. What began as a ghost story became a collision between archaeology, organized crime, international law, and national security. An episode was erased. Footage was locked away. And an investigation meant for television quietly became part of something much larger. For Josh Gates, it was a turning point. A reminder that chasing mysteries carries real-world consequences. And for the industry, it changed how investigative shows handle history, ownership, and legality forever. Some stories are too dangerous to broadcast. Some truths belong in courtrooms, not on cable. If you found this breakdown compelling, let me know your thoughts below. Was shelving the episode the only responsible choice? Or should the truth have aired regardless of the consequences? And if you want more deep dives into the investigations that never made it to television, make sure you're subscribed, because sometimes the stories that disappear are the ones worth examining most.